He told her she was wasting her youth on a man like him, but she didn't step back. She stepped closer. The wind snaps against the schoolhouse door as it swings open, slamming hard against the frame. Chalk dust hangs in the air. Silas stands just inside, hat in his hands, boots leaving melted snow on the floorboards. She doesn't speak, just watches him. Somewhere behind them, a chair scrapes, then goes still. He draws a breath like it costs him something, and says it out loud. What made him come here today? Stay with me to find out. The wind moved first. It came down off the iron ridge in long, steady breaths, slipping through the fence posts, brushing against the dry grass, carrying the faint scent of dust and cold stone. It was the kind of wind that didn't rush. It stayed. It wore things down slowly. Silas Granger stood by the north fence, one boot braced against the lower rail, hammer in hand. The nail bent on the first strike. He pulled it free, turned it between his fingers, then set another in its place. This one went in clean. He didn't hurry. He didn't slow down either. The horse behind him shifted its weight, leather reins creaking soft against the post. Somewhere farther out, a gate tapped once in the wind and then again, a loose rhythm that had been there for years. Silas had meant to fix it last winter, or maybe the winter before that. He worked until the sun climbed high enough to bleach the color out of the hills. Then he stepped back, tested the fence with both hands, and gave a small nod no one saw. By noon, he was back at the house. The place sat low against the land, timber darkened by weather, porch boards worn smooth by years of the same steps taken in the same direction. Inside, it was clean, not warm, just kept. A tin cup sat upside down beside the stove. He turned it over, poured coffee from the pot he'd left warming, and carried it to the table by the window. He always sat in the same chair. From there, he could see the slope down to the creek bed, the line where grass gave way to rock, the stretch of open land where nothing changed unless the weather forced it to. He drank slowly. When the cup was empty, he set it down in the same place, handle turned toward the wall. There was a cloth folded on the far end of the table. Pale blue once. Faded now. He didn't look at it. He hadn't moved it in 11 years. By late afternoon, he saddled up. The ride into town took just over an hour if the ground held. The road cut between low hills, dipped through a dry wash, then climbed again toward Iron Ridge's edge. Hoofbeats carried steady under him, the sound of something known and finished. Grover wasn't much. A feed store, a hardware shop, a church that leaned slightly to the left if you stood far enough back to notice. He tied the horse out front and stepped inside the general store. The bell over the door rang once. "Afternoon, Silas," Mr. Darnell said from behind the counter. Silas gave a nod. "Same as usual? Salt, ammunition, coffee." Darnell moved without asking more. Paper crinkled. A drawer slid open and shut. Coins changed hands. Silas stepped back out into the light. That was when he saw her. She stood across the street near the schoolhouse steps, one hand resting on the wooden rail, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. The door behind her was propped open, and a thin line of gray smoke curled out into the air. She didn't belong to the place. That much was clear without thinking on it. Not because she looked lost. She didn't. She stood straight, steady, as if she'd chosen that exact spot and meant to stay there until whatever she was waiting for arrived. Silas started toward his horse. "Excuse me," she called. He stopped, turned just enough to face her. "You wouldn't happen to know who could take a look at a stove," she said, her voice even, carrying just far enough. "It's been smoking for 3 days. I've opened the flue, cleaned what I can reach. It's not improving." Silas looked past her into the doorway. The smoke drifted slow, not thick enough to choke, but enough to wear on a room. Tom Briggs, he said. Hardware store. Tell him the draft's wrong. He'll know what that means. She nodded once, taking it in as if she'd been given something useful and not just directions. Thank you, she said. I'm Evelyn Brooks. I teach here. Silas shifted his weight, one hand resting on the saddle horn. I know, he said. There was a brief pause. Not awkward. Just there. I've heard of you, she added. Silas didn't answer right away. The wind moved between them, lifting a loose strand of her hair, carrying dust across the road. Somewhere behind him, the bell over the store door rang again. He gave a short nod. Silas Granger, he said. I ranch. I know, she said. He turned then, set his boot in the stirrup, and swung up into the saddle. The leather settled under his weight with a familiar sound. He didn't look back as he rode out of town. But the road home felt longer than it had that morning. The gate tapped once when he reached it. Then again. He stood there a moment, listening to the rhythm he'd ignored for years. Then he led the horse through and closed it behind him. That night, when he poured his coffee, he paused, just for a second, as if measuring something he couldn't quite name. Then he sat down in his usual chair, facing the same stretch of land, the same line of hills, the same quiet that had never once asked anything of him. Only now it didn't feel quite as empty. Not yet. But not the same either. The smoke was gone by Thursday. Tom Briggs had come out with his tools and a bad temper, muttering about warped flues and careless wood stacking. By afternoon, the schoolhouse stove burned clean, a thin blue line rising steady into the sky. Evelyn Brooks stood in the doorway and watched it for a long moment before stepping back inside. The room still smelled faintly of soot, but the air moved better now. She opened the windows anyway, letting the late September wind pass through the desks, lift the loose pages on her table, and carry out what was left of the week before. The children came in slow. Some stood just outside, looking at her as if they weren't sure where to put their hands. One boy held his hat too tight against his chest. A girl lingered near the steps until another child brushed past her and went in first. Evelyn didn't call them. She turned back to the chalkboard and wrote the date in a clean, steady hand. By midday, the room had settled into something that resembled a class. Not easy. Not yet. But moving. Outside, a man paused by the window. Deputy Carl Whitaker. He leaned one shoulder against the frame, arms folded, watching without speaking. Evelyn felt it before she saw him. She kept writing. When she turned, he tipped his hat just enough to count as a gesture, then walked on. At the general store that evening, conversation shifted when she stepped in. Not stopped, just lowered. Mrs. Galloway looked up from a crate of apples and gave her a small nod. Evening, she said. Evening, Evelyn answered. Behind them, someone cleared a throat. A chair scraped. The kind of noise that meant something had been said a moment earlier and would be said again once she left. She bought flour, kerosene, a bar of soap wrapped in thin paper. At the counter, Mr. Darnell set the items down and wrote the total on a small scrap, sliding it toward her. She paid exact. No one offered change. Outside, the sky had gone soft with dusk. Horses shifted along the rail, leather creaking, breath rising pale in the cooling air. Lucas Hale stood near the hitching post, one hand resting easy on the neck of a chestnut gelding. His coat was clean, boots polished in a way that suggested time spent on appearances. Miss Brooks, he said. She paused. Mr. Hale. He stepped closer, not too close, but enough to place himself in her path. You settling in all right? He asked. Well enough. He smiled, the kind that stayed in place whether it belonged or not. This town can be particular, he said. Takes time for folks to come around. I've noticed. He glanced toward the schoolhouse, then back at her, You don't have to make it harder on yourself, he added. There are places better suited. People more. He searched for the word, then let it go. Understanding. Evelyn held his gaze for a second longer than expected. I didn't come here for easy, she said. Lucas's smile tightened at the corners. No, he said. I don't suppose you did. He tipped his hat and stepped aside. She walked past him without looking back. The road out of town stretched quiet under the rising moon. Gravel shifted under her boots. The wind had dropped some, leaving only the faint sound of something moving through the dry grass. Silas Granger's gate came into view just past the bend. She slowed. The place looked the same as it had that first day. Fence lines straight. Porch empty. One lamp lit inside, steady and low. She stood there a moment, hand resting on the top rail. Then she pushed the gate open. It gave with a soft groan. Porter lifted his head from where he lay near the steps. His tail thumped once against the wood, then again, quicker. Don't start, Evelyn said under her breath. The dog stood, stretched long through his back, and came down the steps at an easy pace, as if he'd been expecting her. She walked up to the porch. The door stood half open. Inside, Silas moved from the stove to the table, setting something down without looking toward the entrance. Evening, she said. He stopped, turned just enough to see her. There were 2 cups on the table. He looked at them, then at her. Evening, he said. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The wind slipped through the doorway and stirred the edge of the cloth on the far end of the table. Porter walked in between them, circled once, and settled near the hearth with a low breath. Silas reached for the coffee pot. He didn't ask if she wanted any. He poured, set the second cup across from his own. Evelyn stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She sat down. The chair made a quiet sound against the floorboards. She wrapped her hands around the cup, not drinking yet. Silas leaned back in his chair, eyes on the table, then out toward the window. The ranch held its usual silence, but it didn't feel untouched anymore. Not with her there, not with the second cup set where it had no business being. Outside, somewhere beyond the fence line, the loose gate tapped once, then again. The cold came early that year. By mid-October, frost had already started to settle in the low ground by the creek. The mornings turned brittle. Breath hung in the air longer than it should. Even the horses moved slower, hooves careful on the hardened dirt. Silas noticed it in the way the gate stopped tapping. The wood had tightened with the cold. No more loose rhythm. Just stillness. Evelyn came on Tuesdays, and sometimes on Fridays. Not always for a reason that needed saying. Sometimes it was a question about one of the boys who worked nearby. Sometimes it was a book, wrapped in cloth, placed on the table with a quiet, "I thought you might like this." He always took it. He always read it. Even when he had read it before. They sat across from each other more often now, coffee between them. The second cup no longer something either of them looked at twice. Porter had taken to lying under her chair instead of his. That was how things changed. Not all at once. Just enough that the old shape didn't quite fit anymore. In town it was talked about plainly. Mrs. Galloway said it was a good thing. Said a man shouldn't spend that many years alone without someone noticing. Deputy Whitaker said less, but he watched more. Lucas Hale said it outright. He found Evelyn outside the schoolhouse one afternoon, sleeves rolled, stacking split wood against the wall. "You're making yourself a story people won't forget," he said. She didn't stop working. "People forget most things," she replied. "Not this," Lucas said. "Not when it's him." The axe came down clean through the log. She set the pieces aside without looking at him. "I'm not asking anyone to remember," she said. Lucas stepped closer, boots pressing into the dirt. "You could leave," he said, quieter now. "There are better places, safer ones." Evelyn picked up another piece of wood. "I didn't come here to be safe," she said. He stood there a moment longer, then let out a breath that held more frustration than anger. "You're wasting your time," he said. "He's already decided how his life ends." She paused then, just for a second, then set the wood down and straightened. "That's his decision," she said. Lucas shook his head. "Not when it pulls you down with it." She didn't answer. That night the wind rose again, not steady this time, sharp, cutting across the ridge, pushing clouds low over the land. The knock on Silas's door came just after dark. 3 quick strikes, then nothing. He opened it to find Evelyn standing there, hair pulled back loose, coat dusted with fine snow. "There's a boy," she said, breath uneven. "Thomas Aldridge. Fever's turned bad. His father can't get him down the pass. I need help." Silas didn't ask anything else. He turned, grabbed his coat, reached for the lantern. The ride out was hard. Snow had started to fall in thin sheets, not enough to blind, but enough to blur the ground ahead. The trail cut narrow along the ridge, one side dropping off into dark that had no bottom in the night. Evelyn rode just behind him. Once her horse slipped. Just a step. Nothing more. Silas reached back without thinking, steadying the reins until the animal found its footing again. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. By the time they reached the Aldridge place, the lantern light from the window had gone dim. Inside, the boy burned hot under too many blankets, his breathing shallow. His father stood near the bed, hands useless at his sides. Evelyn moved first. Water, cloth, instructions given low and quick. Silas stood back, watching the room shift around her, watching the way she worked without hesitation, without doubt. Like it mattered that the boy lived, like it was the only thing that did. They stayed until the fever broke, not all at once, just enough that the boy's breathing slowed, the tightness easing from his chest. Outside, the storm had settled into a steady fall. The ride back was quieter. Snow softened the ground under the horses. The world reduced to white and shadow and the sound of breath. They reached the ridge just as the sky began to lighten. Silas pulled the reins and stopped. The land stretched out below them, pale under the first hint of morning. Evelyn came up beside him. For a while they said nothing. Then Silas spoke. "You shouldn't be doing this," he said. She turned her head slightly. "Doing what?" "Coming out here," he said. "Riding in storms, spending time on a place like this." He didn't look at her. "You deserve something easier," he went on. "Someone younger." The words settled between them. Cold. Final. Evelyn didn't answer right away. The wind moved across the ridge, lifting the edge of her coat. Silas kept his eyes on the horizon. Didn't turn. Didn't wait. Then, without another word, he nudged his horse forward and started down the slope. He didn't look back to see if she followed. The snow held through the morning. By the time Silas reached his gate, it had settled into the ground in a thin, quiet layer, softening the edges of everything. The fence lines blurred. The trail behind him faded faster than it should have. He dismounted without tying the horse right away, stood there a moment with his hand on the reins, looking out across the land as if something might answer him if he waited long enough. Nothing did. Inside, the house felt colder than it had the night before. He set the lantern down, hung his coat, moved through the same steps he always did. Wood in the stove, water on the boil, coffee measured without looking. Only this time, when he reached for the second cup, He stopped. His hand hovered over the shelf, then pulled back. He poured one, set it down, drank it standing. Outside, hoofbeats came up the path. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Silas closed his eyes once, then opened them and turned. Evelyn stood at the door before he reached it. Snow had gathered along the edges of her coat, melted in places where the fabric warmed under her breath. Her gloves were damp. Her face was calm, not soft, not hurt. Just certain. He stepped aside without a word. She walked in, closed the door behind her. For a while, neither of them spoke. The stove ticked as the heat rose. Water shifted in the kettle. Porter lifted his head from the corner, watching them both, then laid it back down again. Evelyn moved to the table. Her fingers brushed the wood once, as if measuring something. "You're wrong," she said. Silas didn't answer. He stood near the window, hands resting on the frame, eyes on the land he'd already used as a shield. "You think this is about years," she went on. "About numbers that can be counted and compared." Still nothing. She took a step closer. "I didn't come here for younger," she said, her voice quieter now, but steadier. "I came here because you listen. Because when something needs doing, you do it. Because you don't pretend to be something you're not." Silas's jaw tightened. "That's not enough," he said. "It is," she answered. He turned then, finally looked at her. For a second, something almost broke through. Then it closed again, the way it always had. "You don't know what you're choosing," he said. Evelyn met his eyes. "I know exactly what I'm choosing." The words sat between them. No force, no urgency. Just wait. Silas looked away first. His gaze landed on the far end of the table, the folded cloth. He hadn't meant to look at it, hadn't meant to see it the way it was, thin now, worn at the edges, but still holding the shape it had been left in. He crossed the room without thinking, reached for it. His hand stopped halfway. Then, slowly, he picked it up. The fabric shifted under his fingers, softer than he remembered, or maybe he had forgotten what it felt like. Evelyn didn't move, didn't speak. Silas stood there with the cloth in his hand, eyes fixed somewhere past it. "I buried her in winter," he said, the words coming low and even. "Ground was too hard. Took 3 men to break it." The room held still. "I stayed," he went on, "because that's what you do. You stay where things were built. You keep them standing." His grip tightened slightly on the fabric. "Somewhere along the way," he said, "I stopped deciding. Just let it be what it was." Evelyn watched him. Not with pity, not with distance, just there. "You didn't stop deciding," she said quietly. "You decided to stay the same." Silas let out a breath that didn't quite settle. "That's easier," he said. Evelyn nodded once. "Yes," she said. "It is." Silence again. Then she stepped back. Just one step. "I won't come out here anymore," she said. The words landed sharper than anything before them. Silas looked up. She held his gaze. "You don't get to decide for both of us," she added. "You don't get to choose what I deserve and call it kindness." He didn't answer, didn't reach for anything to hold on to. Evelyn turned, opened the door. Cold air moved in around her. She paused at the threshold. Not long. Just enough to let the moment stand as it was. Then she stepped out into the snow and closed the door behind her. The sound echoed more than it should have. Silas stood in the center of the room, the cloth still in his hand, the second cup still on the shelf. Unmoved. Outside, the wind picked up again. Not strong, just enough to carry the sound of her horse moving away. He didn't follow. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at the table until the fire burned low, the room dimming around him, the weight of something shifting in a way he couldn't push back this time. When morning came, the snow had stopped. The world looked clean, unmarked. Silas stepped out onto the porch and stood there, breathing in the cold air. Then he went back inside, reached for the second cup, held it in his hand for a long moment. The cup was warm, not hot anymore, just enough to hold heat if you kept your hand around it. Silas stood by the table, turning it slightly between his fingers. The handle faced outward, the way he used to set it. The way it had been set for weeks now without him noticing when it changed. Outside, the morning had cleared. Snow still lay along the fence lines and shaded ground, but the sky had opened wide and pale. The kind of cold day that didn't threaten, just reminded you it was there. He set the cup down, not in its old place, across from his. Then he stepped back, looked at it. Something in his chest shifted again. Not sharp this time, not breaking, just moving. By mid-morning, he had the horse saddled. He didn't rush, same as always. Cinch pulled tight, reins checked, hat settled low against the light. But he didn't go to the north fence. He turned toward town. The road felt different in daylight. Tracks from the night before had already softened under the sun. What had been clear was fading. What had been decided was less so. He rode steady, didn't stop. Grover came into view slow, roofs cutting into the sky, smoke lifting from chimneys in thin lines. He didn't go to the store, didn't tie up out front. He rode straight past it. A few heads turned. No one called out. The schoolhouse stood at the far end, door shut, windows catching the light. Silas dismounted before the steps. For a moment he stood there with his hand on the reins. Then he let them fall loose. Walked up, knocked once. Inside, a chair scraped. Low voices, then quiet. The door opened. Evelyn stood there. Chalk dust marked her sleeve. A book rested in her hand, thumb holding a page. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she stepped aside. "Class is dismissed," she said over her shoulder. The children gathered their things quickly. Boots scuffed across the floor. A few looked between them as they passed, sensing something without knowing what. When the room cleared, the silence settled in. Clean, honest. Evelyn set the book down on the desk. "You came on a Wednesday," she said. "I did. You've never done that before." "I know." She waited. Silas took his hat off, held it in both hands for a moment, fingers brushing the brim. "I don't have many years left," he said. No hesitation, no looking away this time. "I won't pretend I do." Evelyn's eyes stayed on him. "But I won't spend them pretending I don't want you," he went on. The words landed different than before, not pushed away, not guarded, just set down between them. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She stepped closer. Not all the way, just enough that the space between them changed. Outside, a shadow moved past the window. Deputy Whitaker. He slowed, stopped. The door opened without knocking. "You're needed back on your place, Granger," he said, voice even but tight at the edges. "Heard you've got things getting out of hand." Silas didn't turn. "She's staying," he said. Whitaker's boots creaked as he stepped inside. "That's not your call," he replied. Silas shifted then, just enough to stand between the door and Evelyn. "It is now." The room held still. Whitaker looked at him a long second. then at Evelyn, then back again. Something passed there. Not agreement. Not approval. Just recognition that the line had been drawn. "Your business," Whitaker said finally. He stepped back out and pulled the door closed behind him. The sound echoed once, then faded. Silas didn't move. Neither did Evelyn. For a moment, the world outside felt far away. She studied him, longer than before, as if measuring something that didn't show on the surface. Then she spoke. "I already found him." The words were quiet, but they held. Silas let out a breath he hadn't known he was carrying. Not relief. Something steadier than that. He stepped back, not away. Just enough to give her space to choose. Evelyn picked up her coat, walked past him. He followed her outside. The sky stretched wide above the town, clear, cold, open. They crossed the street together without speaking. At the hitching post, he held the reins steady while she mounted. No hurry, no hesitation. Then he swung up behind her. The horse shifted once, then settled. They rode out the same road he had taken alone 100 times. Only this time, the space behind him wasn't empty. Back at the ranch, the gate stood quiet. He dismounted first, reached up without looking. She took his hand. Not tight, just enough. Inside, the house felt different, not fuller, just used. She set her things down near the door, looked around once, didn't comment. Silas moved to the table, 2 cups already there. He poured, set one in front of her. This time he didn't pause. Outside, the wind moved across Iron Ridge, same as always, but it didn't carry the same sound anymore. If you stood there long enough, on that porch, with the wind moving past the fence and the mountains holding the light, you might start to understand what changed. Not the land, not the years behind him, just the way a man finally lets himself be seen. Maybe you've known that kind of quiet, the kind that settles in after loss, after time passes without asking your permission. Maybe you've told yourself, the way Silas did, that some doors close for good, that what's left is enough, even if it feels like something is missing. And then someone walks in, not loudly, not asking to be saved, just staying. Long enough to show you that what you thought was finished was only waiting. Silas didn't become someone new. He didn't turn back the years or change the life he had built. He just stopped counting the wrong things. He stopped measuring what was left and started holding what was still there. And sometimes, that's all it takes. A second cup on a table, a hand that doesn't pull away, a voice that says quietly, "I already found him." If this story stayed with you, tell me where you're listening from. I'd like to know how far it traveled. There are more stories like this, waiting just beyond the next ridge. When you're ready, you can ride along with me.